I honestly believe that for most, and certainly every vertical and every horizontal, persona-based SaaS product, if they exist in 5 years, ABM will be the default go-to-market motion, because there is no reason, I think, in this AI forward world to not personalize.
To get started, it would be great to just hear a little bit about yourself and your role at Datadog.
Yeah, so I'm the head of ABM and global campaigns at Datadog, which happily is a global program. We've got this executing in all the major regions, LATAM, AMER, EMEA, and APJ. Globally, we engage in a number of different tactics that I think kind of tread the boundary of growth versus ABM. And then obviously some of our product campaigns that I also manage are pretty exciting. And that's definitely a new motion for us. So my background is very much an enterprise marketer by trade. I was at IBM for, I think, 7 years, did a couple of years at a software company called Anaplan before Datadog, and really enjoy ABM at its core, and finding a way to kind of get big companies to act with more agility and ultimately help support sales. That's kind of what drives me. So
okay, and I was kind of looking at your background a little bit ahead, and it seems like you kind of shifted from what it was more focused on growth marketing to then ABM. Just curious, what made you sort of orient yourselves into that specific marketing and sales?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of different roles, and certainly my advice to anybody trying to get started in marketing is like, don't become a specialist. Like try different things and figure out how to get, involved in as many different types of marketing as possible, because it really helps if your goal is to end up in marketing leadership someday, to have empathy across these different functions and understand what they do, understand what their pain points are, that type of stuff. But really what drives me is being close to the revenue and being close to sales. Ultimately, I found that is a really impactful place to be. It's a place that frankly is really easy to justify your existence when you are clearly supporting deal flow. And the further and further away you get from that, I think the harder it is to map your impact really cleanly. And so that is really what gets me excited about ABM, is just how close you get to the actual dollars coming in the door, and how clear cut that impact is. And it's a risk, right? Because it's very easy on the content side to say, I've created good content. It's, this and this didn't happen from other teams, and that's why that we didn't get as many leads or impressions or whatever your goals are. With ABM, you're kind of held almost to a quota like sales, right? Like how many accounts you have, how many meetings you book, how much pipeline you produce. So I do think that the sort of risk is a little bit higher with ABM, but certainly the reward when you hit is an incredible feeling, and one that really drives me. So
absolutely. So yeah, I think a sort of trend that we've seen is really marketing teams moving further down into the funnel.
Yeah.
Really kind of being accountable for proving not just impressions, but also meetings booked, pipeline attribution. So ABM's been around for a while, but it feels like there's been a shift, especially in the last 2-3 years. Is that something that you've noticed, and what do you think is contributing to that shift?
I think one of the things is better access to data and the quality of data. Certainly data warehouses and data lakes have made this more accessible than it used to be as it relates to marketing attribution. And when that's been now possible to see that lead or the warm account or whatever your kind of KPI is or primary vector of tracking this stuff, you can now see that all the way through that journey all the way to customer, right? And so once that data became available, I do think that more and more cutting edge advanced marketers are starting to move down that funnel, because they're starting to see that they can prove out impact easier in the ways that I just described. One of the things I think that is driving ABM into a new era, right? And I kind of look at ABM when I was coming up in marketing was very much about it's a content generation function. You are producing one-to-one, one-to-few content for a select number of accounts. You share that with sales. They send it out in PG or on site. You're hosting on sites. It was event driven for a long time. More and more, I'm seeing that ABM function come back towards growth, come back towards digital, right? Because of the tooling, because of the advances in advertisement and targeting that's been made in a lot of different functions. I think that is transforming what it means to do ABM.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of heat for this. I did this newsletter with a friend, and my point has always been that meetings are ultimately what are the most important and most impactful thing that an ABM team can drive. And I got accused of a bunch of questions around, is this really ABM? Is it, from my perspective, you can call it advanced physics. I don't really care that much as long as it is driving the pipeline and driving those meetings. I think that's the most important thing that I have to offer. And again, because of what we've seen with, those ad platforms, what have you, that's become a lot more possible. So.
Yeah, of course. Because something that you sort of mentioned that sort of ringing in my head is all this new sort of tooling around data and enrichment and sort of being able to get the intent from your account is what has created a shift in the market.
Yeah.
But like, how many people are actually, do you think, leveraging that data in the right way? I think there's a key gap between insight and activation.
No, it's definitely true. And the other thing that I would caution most marketers to think about is, does my LinkedIn feed reflect the reality of where the market is today? For instance, like I've heard a lot of things about signal-based marketing for job posts is dead. It's too commoditized. Everybody's using it. I just hired somebody on my team, and I asked them, like, every time you get a PG email or an outbound email that mentions your new job, forward it to me. I get 3 emails in 3 months.
Yeah.
For a company the size of Datadog, I mean, I would assume it's on a lot of people's target lists, right, or wish list. So, the idea that all of these maturity curves are as advanced as they are according to your LinkedIn feed, I think is very dangerous to think about, because it stops you from picking up low-hanging fruit. So yeah, I mean, that's my perspective on that.
Okay, that's a very good point. Because my next question is effectively a key thing that contributes to that in this day and age. AI is everywhere. Yeah, it's the top topic. It's what everyone's using to market themselves, market their businesses. So a lot seems possible and it's exciting. Interested to hear your thoughts on what's the shift that you're seeing with this new AI tools, and like, what would you say is the gap between what we're seeing and what's reality? Like, where maybe have you tried to use AI and ultimately just been a bit disappointed?
Yeah. So a couple of parts there. First of all, what do I think the reality of ABM is today, or AI for ABM is today? I think in general, what I've found is that scalability, especially of hyper-personalized activations, I'll just say across a number of channels and content types, is improving with AI. And I expect that curve is only going to increase in scale. And I think that will be a democratizing force for smaller teams, ultimately startups being able to play a lot more aggressively against entrenched enterprise players. The flip side of that is, how noisy does the market get, and how sort of table stakes does, different levels and elements of personalization become, or tailoring or relevance. I think that's probably something that we have to keep an eye on as marketers, and make sure that we're staying ahead of whatever those trends are. But look, the reality is, like, one story that's been all over the news is Anthropic made it to, whatever number of revenue with one growth marketer. Yeah. Right. And there's creative enhancements that are being driven by Figma plugins with Anthropic, and we're rewriting all of our Google ad copy, every 2 days or whatever the numbers are. Curiously, I just went to Anthropic's LinkedIn and looked at their creative strategy on the ads library. I'm not convinced that was really happening in practice, right? Yeah. And I think Anthropic has a vested interest in making it sound like AI can do a lot of this stuff, right? Because it makes me want to buy more credits. It makes me want to go and use it. So I think there's an element of hype, and it's hype that's maybe even encouraged by some of the frontier model providers. But the real impact that I'm seeing, again, is the scale. Like, we have been able to produce personalization for 500 plus accounts across ads, microsites, et cetera, that would not have been possible without AI. I would need a team of 10 to be able to do the level of research and analysis, and then content production and copy production that we're able to use when a team of 3 is augmented with AI. So I do think that the reality there, when you've got human in the loop, when you are sort of realistic about what the quality and the output of these models are going to offer, and you really chunk out your prompts to be very specific, have verification agents on top of what you're producing, all of those kind of safeguards in place. And again, that reality of where we are in the maturity curve, I think are making a huge difference for marketers in real life.
Okay. Because a topic that sort of comes up when you're seeing a lot of these AI or non-AI tools that help more teams adopt ABM as a tactic internally. So you could think of it as like democratization of ABM.
For sure.
Because I feel like until recently, ABM was really reserved to those large enterprise clients. Do you think that's like a misconception in the market? Do you think there's such a thing as democratization of ABM? And if so, then my next question is, what sort of role do ABM agencies play in that world?
Okay. So, I really do believe that ABM can become democratized and will become democratized through AI and the agility that smaller teams are able to kind of bring to bear. The one thing I'd be cautious of is there is always, an enterprise, advantage that is brought to bear, right? More people, more resources financially, greater impact. Just simply one of the things that I think, I'm often asked for advice on, startup marketing, what have you. The brands that I've worked for have had brand awareness north of 50% in the markets that I've played in. The idea, I don't frankly have a lot of good strategies for driving net new mind share with people, right? It's just not a challenge that I've had to personally execute on. So I think there's an element of like, just because ABM and the strategies are being democratized, and they will likely, startups will continue to outpace enterprises in producing more nascent and interesting and cool, ABM strategies, does not mean that they, are going to be able to always overcome those hurdles. What role do ABM agencies play? I mean, in general, I personally believe that doing things in-house is the easiest and best path forward. And the reason why is that one of the things that I've seen become more important for ABM is the knowledge of the product and the knowledge of your sales process, your limitations with certain salespeople, that type of stuff. I think agencies struggle to ever have that context because they're just relying, they're dealing with so many different clients at one time or shorter engagements or whatever. I think without that context, ABM struggles. And so, my perspective has always been, even back in the day, that the ABM should really be an in-house function.
Okay. Yeah. Because what we've seen is like, ABM agencies have the ability themselves to adopt tools that help improve things like, the users of this world or AI, other AI products, but they seem reluctant to do so.
Right.
Do you think that's more, needing to adapt to this sort of like mind shift, or do you think just the whole playbook is going to change and really you're going to move to more, internal teams just building the tools that they need for ABM?
I don't know. I mean, is the short answer. I think anybody who says they have a crystal ball as it relates to, what the actual output of AI is going to be on human labor and the scale that you're able to operate with, one individual or two individuals on a team, I think is probably crazy. But in general, I do think that a lot of the resources that agencies, they throw bodies at advertising or they throw bodies at content production or those types of things. Those are fundamentally skills that AI can be really, really good at, right? And that strategic work is what AI is not going to be able to replace today. And that's ultimately, I think, what in-house teams are really good at. And so the marriage between AI and in-house teams seems to be really similar in a lot of ways to agencies versus in-house teams. And I don't know that bodes well for ABM agencies overall.
Yeah, I see what you mean. We've covered a lot of topics. I think what I've seen is like a lot of ABM managers today look up to you and the work that you've done at Datadog. I would say you're one of the more sort of advanced, sort of have one of the most advanced ABM programs in the market at the minute.
Yeah,
my opinion.
Okay,
I'm not speaking.
Okay.
So my question would be like to any sort of ABM manager, looks up to you and is either starting or looking to scale their program.
Yeah.
Like, what do you say to them?
First of all, thank you, but it might be a bit aggressive. I don't know how if people are looking up to me. That's an interesting thought. So, look, in my experience, the most important part of scaling an ABM program, certainly starting one, is sales trust, because ABM itself, even growth marketing with a tinge of ABM, goes nowhere without sales belief that it is an important function, that it will have value for them. And ultimately will drive results, because the other thing I think that's really important to understand is salespeople constantly have demands on their attention, right? They've got external clients that they need to speak to. They've got sales enablement folks that want their time to help train them. They've got their sales managers who want their updates on forecasts. They are being pulled in a lot of different directions, and unless you are sympathetic to that and understand how your processes are going to fit in and how to sell the value of the program that you're asking them for, because inevitably ABM takes time away from sales. They have to do a lot of work that they're not doing today without ABM. That is the most important thing to get right, because it's the other component of that is that sales trust is kind of a one-shot game.
Yeah.
You lose it to begin with, your ABM program is toast. You need to start over, right? And so that is the number one thing I'd focus on. Build a couple of champions that you know will work with you, that are excited about ABM, that are maybe on the kind of front, leading edge of sales tooling and processes and that type of thing, and get them to sell for you internally, and literally treat it like a multi-threading, that you'd execute as a campaign externally. Because I think that salespeople, speaking to salespeople is, with that empathy is ultimately what drives value. And buy-in from other salespeople. So that's really the most important thing that I would start with. And then the other thing is there is a real perception that ABM inevitably has to be expensive. It has to be large. It has to be scaled. Start small, because it really allows you more opportunity to test and learn. Because no matter what you see on LinkedIn, every account, every company, every product buy is different. And so if you are not learning those lessons internally and you're just relying on prior experience or your LinkedIn feed, you're going to struggle to get results that really move the needle, especially with some of the enhanced targeting costs that you may, take on as part of starting an ABM program. So start small and kind of prove and really treat it like an experiment and get sales buy-in. Those are the two most important things for starting off.
And so am I correct in what that means is kind of start closer to sales team further down the funnel, or is it closer to sales team but kind of further up in the funnel?
I think it depends on how your sales teams are incented, how they're optimized, how they want to, where do they need support, right? Like some sales teams are very comfortable closing, but they don't have the inbound that they need. Some sales teams really kind of struggle with competitive incursions in the middle of deals or whatever. That should determine where you kind of place your bets ABM wise. On what channels, on what, stages of the funnel, that type of stuff. But, the most important thing is just meeting sales wherever they are and aligning your program to what those few, kind of leading individuals need.
Got it. Okay. And sort of going more back to and kind of the work that you're doing, what does the next sort of 12 to 24 months look like for you in terms of what you're working on sort of maybe today, but then with the excitement of these new tools that are coming into the market, what are you looking forward to?
I think, again, I kind of briefly mentioned this, but personalization and increasing the size of our one-to-one program. One-to-one traditionally has been limited by human labor, right? You can only do a certain number of accounts at one time, one-to-one, because you've only got a certain number of people. And typically that is where sales starts to see real value, is the one-to-one, not necessarily in terms of pipe, because I can prove pipe on one to few. I can prove pipe in meetings on one to many, but they just don't feel it the same way. Right. And when you get sales to really kind of feel that ABM is crucial to helping them in a deal, I think that's where you start to get that, again, that lateral movement inside of sales organizations. They're talking to each other about your program, that type of stuff. So scaling one-to-one through automation, through AI, through new tooling, and leaning less on manual research, manual content creation, manual advertising optimizations to support those one-to-one motions, I think is something that I see as a huge unlock. And frankly, my plan, full stop, is to double the number of one-to-one accounts that we can cover over the course of the next 18 months here.
Okay. And I don't know if that's something that you are sort of proactively thinking about, but like, how do you ensure that quality stays whilst scaling that program? Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is retraining the team and kind of focusing your team on acting as a human in the loop, an editor, a sort of, I hate this word, but acting with taste as it relates to AI, because a lot of that manual work is just going to become less relevant, less impactful. And those are skills, frankly, that I think many ABMers will be reticent to lose. They will be disappointed to, their ability to research and synthesize account notes and that type of stuff is no longer as valuable as it once was. And I think that'll be scary for a lot of people. But ultimately, if we do not adopt that new human in the loop model, where we're starting to think as ourselves about, sort of being the editors or being the gatekeepers of what AI can produce and then feeding that to sales, I don't think you can scale. And I think that you'll start to miss out on some of the skill building that the next evolution is going to require.
I see. Because building onto that, like, ABM in, say, the next 5 years time.
Yeah.
What does ABM in 5 years look like to you? Crystal ball.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly believe that for most, and certainly every vertical and every horizontal, persona-based SaaS product, if they exist in 5 years, will be ABM will be the default go-to-market motion, because there is no reason, I think, in this AI forward world to not personalize, right? The risk is frankly too high. It's so easy to create relevance through personalization, and frankly, so much more difficult to create relevance through really solid ICP targeting, especially because ICPs are moving weekly at this point with the amount of transition that we're seeing in the market that's really driven by AI hype, if not actual technological improvement in some of these product areas. So, ultimately, I see growth marketing and ABM becoming one, and I think that that's a process that's already started in certain cases. There really should not be too much of a difference between what your kind of broad approach looks like and what your really targeted one-to-one approach looks like, unless it's something that requires, real human interaction events, that type of stuff. So, I kind of see that convergence as a really important theme. And then, again, just the scale of one-to-one and the scale of personalization, I think, will be really important. And the thing that I'm really looking forward to is not just AI, right? Because that is the output, but ultimately the inputs, right? I think we will see data warehouses. I think we will see data programs across, SaaS become more advanced, and ultimately access and democratization of that data means that the AI outputs, or the human outputs, regardless, will be more effective. And it's the data hygiene, the data collection and categorization are things that I think a lot about in my role, just because I've seen the importance of having that right on the impact you can have from an ABM perspective, account selection, content, et cetera. So
summarizing everything we've discussed, if someone listening to this or watching this goes back to their desk and there's one thing that they should do to improve, extend, start the ABM program, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to talk to salespeople. You need to understand where the pain is right now. And even for very advanced ABM managers, I think, you start out really aggressive with sales because you're kind of getting that buy-in, and then you kind of pull back a little bit. You've got the scale, you've got the sales buy-in. Maybe you don't need to talk to them as much. Yeah. The market is changing, right? No matter what you are selling, the market is changing. And so talking to your salespeople and making sure that, your priors from 6-12 months ago are still current with them. Their pain is still, you've nailed it as far as the way you're adapting your programs to what they're facing, I think is really important. And, the other thing I would say is, if you've got a RevOps team or if you've got a data team, thinking about, is there any possibility to start involving them more in ABM, again, from an account selection or from a building content perspective? I think that's one thing I'm seeing the most advanced ABM teams do is get further into the data stack and partnering very closely with RevOps to, account scoring for ABM and account scoring for territory and quota are basically the same. And that's really, an evolution that if you're starting an ABM program is not that hard to achieve, usually. So those are the two recommendations I'd have.
That's a good point. I think something we've seen, especially at User-Led, is, some teams that we work with, they're really like a one-person team.
Yeah.
And really ABM for me is a team effort. And, you've got design teams, branding teams, content teams, ops, sort of marketing ops or RevOps teams, salespeople, marketers. Like it's really a collective. And, what we strive to is really kind of like bridging that gap between all those teams. And one of it is like really sales adoption is critical. And, marketers and salespeople aren't technical at all. So I do see that these sort of RevOps, marketing ops teams play a big role in that as well. Or any of the sort of platforms that help bridge that gap.
Makes total sense.
So we talked about how you're approaching your ABM program, but like going a little bit more into the details of how you're doing that. Like what kind of tools are you using today, whether it's AI or non-AI, to run your programs? Yeah.
So one of the things that I think, kind of just to level set is we use a direct mail platform for automation there. direct mail for me is a huge component of ABM. It's sort of a hybrid, almost digital or like scalable physical channel that really breaks through the noise. And so we have a platform to help us with that. On the advertising side, I think contact-based marketing is going to become an important part of what the future of ABM looks like. So we've got a tool that does that for us and helps create those audiences in LinkedIn, in Meta, in Google. I'm a big proponent of ABM going beyond just LinkedIn. I think that's where a lot of teams stop. And I think that's to their detriment, because the CPMs on Google, on Facebook are much lower. The competition is lower. Those are all areas that I think are pretty nascent for ABM. And then lastly, like one of the more important tools we have is the ability to automate the creation and the distribution of microsites. Fundamentally, I've always thought about microsites as really nice for one-to-one, but so hard to scale, so hard to get distribution for. You'd have to go create the LinkedIn ads. You'd have to get sales buy-in. You'd have to get them the links. You'd have to go get them to actually send it out, enable the SDRs on how to use them. Like the manual process of microsites was such a problem for so long. And I think, we've seen a couple of tools come into the market, user-led being one of them, that has really disrupted that in a way that focusing on distribution first rather than the beauty of building the microsite, right? And ultimately, that I think is what this next evolution of microsite scale and distribution looks like, is going to be enabling marketers to bring that program beyond one-to-one, bring it to one-to-few, bring it to one-to-many. Ultimately, microsites, I think, are another thing that sales really cares about, because it feels real. It's something they can hold on to, right? Yep. It's something that they can share, after an onsite or during a meeting or whatever. And it can also help illuminate their point of view beyond what an email or a static PDF would do. And so I do think that just from a sales buy-in perspective as well, microsites are really important to kind of driving ABM adoption.
Yeah. And to that point, what would you say is like the key to getting them to buy into the microsites? Is it an access thing? It's
a great question. I mean, the most important thing I think is meeting in the middle between you are doing some of the work for them and then the customization. Because I've shown a lot of salespeople a blank page for a microsite and said, what do you want to put on here? And they're like, I have no idea. Yeah. Right. They're not marketers by trade. They don't understand necessarily how a landing page would be used or how it would be scrolled or those types of things. So I think you have to bring an idea, a template, and maybe some sort of initial personalization to them. And then they need the ability to, make suggestions or make edits based on meetings or make edits based on, where they are in the deal cycle, all of those things. The more automated we can get those, I think that's really the key to getting sales to buy in, is don't give them a blank slate, but also don't lock it down so much that it's only marketing writing them and they can't, adjust the pages to kind of reflect what their current PG strategy is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Especially around kind of content governance, making sure that you are keeping a unified messaging across the funnel, but also so much information comes in the conversations that sales have. They need some sort of agency to be able to update the content if they need.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
Nice. So talking about kind of like starting or scaling your program, and for your Datadog, like how do you measure the success of your program?
Yeah, it's a tough question, because I think it depends a lot on what the attribution model is and how do you fit your ABM program to adopt it. And I've heard a lot of marketers complain about attribution models and saying, well, it's not taking into account X, Y, and Z. Attribution models fundamentally are a choice that the business has made, I think, in a lot of cases. And, they are choosing to measure something specific that they believe is going to be a benefit to the company. And usually those choices are not made unconsciously. And so I do think that marketers, especially ABMers, have a responsibility to adapt their strategy to hit the goals that are being set out by the business, because, again, that's something that they have deemed important. What does that actually look like in practice at Datadog? When we joined, there was a very specific MQL model that was in place, and typically that was how marketing was attributed. I don't think ABM solely can rely on MQLs. I don't think that sets an ABM program up for success. So what we did was said, okay, give us a 20 to 30% discount on the efficiency that you'd expect on the MQL basis to account for non-lead generating channels, awareness-based plays with advertising, for instance, and the added expense that you're going to incur based on, tighter targeting than your growth team or your events team would incur. And so that was agreed to by the business. And then what we did was we worked into an incrementality testing control and hold or control and test group for ABM. So when we started the program, we looked at the total pipeline attainment for the sellers that we were supporting. We looked at the total meeting attainment for the sellers that we were supporting. And then we started to also look at the number of website hits that we'd get from those accounts. And ultimately what we wanted that to do is sort of look like a funnel. The more often they're on the website, the more meetings they should take, the more opportunities should get produced. Yeah. The thing is you kind of have to look at like marketing influence or marketing source differently. And so what we said was anybody that's in the test group, right, that's getting ABM support is going to be evaluated across the entirety of the pipeline production, of the meetings production, regardless of what the source was, regardless, you can't really rely on data quality. What you can rely on is the impact of A/B testing, right? And so we didn't care about what the source of the meetings were. We cared about the fact that the control group was performing much worse than the test group, the ABM supported group. And so that really was a model that helped prove out, the impact of ABM to our CMO, to our head of growth marketing and revenue marketing. And those were, I think, important early learnings that, got us funded, got us staffed, got us, sort of as a core integral part of how we go to market. But ultimately, I think, my advice would be match your ABM strategy the way that you are measuring it to the normal attribution model that you are kind of contending with, at least in part. You can't just ignore it and decide like, I just would rather just kind of, attribute this differently, because as soon as you do that, you're out in the cold. Nobody's going to fund you. Like you need to be able to find a way to prove the value both within the normal attribution model. And then if it's restrictive in some way, find a way of control testing to get you better access to funding and resources based on proving the value of ABM to the business overall.
Okay. So am I correct in my understanding of the answer there, which is you're not necessarily attributing website traffic and meetings to an ABM campaign effectively, but you're effectively A/B testing, creating two different groups, and then you're just overall measuring just better performance across the board.
Correct.
On your ABM test group.
And what we try and do is make those groups as similar as possible. Exactly. Industry, revenue, number of employees, all those types of things. Because as soon as you start to play with those numbers, then maybe the outcomes are going to be slightly different. But the more that we can control for that, the better off, I think, and the more realistic, our RevOps team and our marketing operations team feel that those, results are consistent and reliable. But yeah, we did not worry about channel attribution. We did not worry about where the source of certain components of that KPI were coming from. It was purely about, are we doing more when we look at ABM support versus the accounts that are not getting ABM support?
Exactly. Final question, I kind of want to give more to you. Like, is there anything that maybe we haven't sort of covered that you think is important and relevant to this conversation?
I think one of the frustrations that I have with ABM media content out there is how applicable are these things in practice, right? A lot of times we'll talk about strategy, we'll talk about getting your data right, and then it's like, okay, but what do I actually do now, right? What channels do I do? Where do I start? And I kind of dodged that question earlier, but the reality is like ABM for me comes down to a couple of different actual channels, right? It's direct mail, and I have kind of an executive strategy, and I have sort of we call them hands-on keys or HOK strategy. We have a digital advertising component. We have sort of one-to-one events and on-sites that we support. And then ultimately we have, just sort of a general lead flow that we do to book meetings and that type of stuff that we source through third parties, events, that type of, trade shows. That's really what ABM looks like, at the scale that Datadog operates at. And so, those channels and that type of stuff need to be customized to whatever your problems are. But like in terms of actual activation, and once we have all our strategies right, how do you actually get it into market? Those are the answers for Datadog. And, I think that's something that's missing from a lot of these conversations. So hopefully that adds to it.
Yeah, it's a good point, because basically the question is like, is ABM one thing or is it many things? And do you start with ABM or do you start with a specific strategy, a channel, and then you evolve to multiple, and then before you know it, you're doing ABM?
Yeah. I mean, to that end, I think, again, it really comes down to whatever your salespeople think, because the strategies that you take for prospecting or sort of like, early pipeline are very, very different from the strategies and the channels you'd utilize for late stage ABM. And so, again, adapting to whatever your salespeople need, I think, is the best way to get buy-in. And that dictates how your strategy is defined.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. Thank you, Kevin.
Absolutely. Great to be here.